just a quick disclaimer, this video is not telling you the only way to tune your car. Do what feels good to you. I'm just giving you base settings that help me out, and I hope they help you guys out too. Thanks. Yo, what's up guys? Twisty coming at you with a video on how to tune your cars in Forza Motorsport 7 for drifting. Now, this video is probably not going to be best for people that are completely new to drifting. If you haven't drifted before, you're not very good, or you don't know how to set up cars, I might make another tutorial in the future, or you could probably go and watch other tutorials on YouTube. Now, let's just get right into this. Once you get to the tune setup menu, it can be pretty daunting with all these different tabs and you don't really know what they do for sure. So I'm just going to go through some of my base settings that I use to tune my cars so you guys can hopefully get a little better and a little faster if you're looking to compete like I do. So let's start with tire pressure. You can learn a lot of what each individual thing does if you push the right stick down and it opens up this helm menu. The bad thing about this is most of these helm menus are designed for circuit racing because that is the primary user base of Forza. So sometimes these can be really helpful and other times not so much. For my tire pressure, the main thing I do is you want to try and get to the point where your car doesn't understeer too much and it doesn't oversteer too much. So good base settings that I use are 28 psi in the front and 26 psi in the rear. If your car understeers too much, you can try lowering the psi in the front. The most I would change at a time is 1 psi at a time. And if your car oversteers too much, you can also do the same for the rear. But in the rear, I would not recommend going lower than 24 psi. On to gearing. This is the menu that I found people have the most problems with. It can be pretty scary because you see all these numbers, you're not really sure what they do, but you have this graph down in the bottom left of your corner that kind of helps you get a grasp on what you're doing. So for my base tuning, I start out my final drive at 410 on every single car. So from your final drive, it's actually pretty basic. You want to have your gears not so short that all you do is spin your tires, but not so long that you're not in the optimal power band. Now of course, this will be different for every single car because your gearing varies with how much usable RPM you have within that car. Now this is just the base setup for gears I use on all my cars. If it's too long, just lengthen it out a bit. Lengthen out your speed in the main gear you use. The main gear I use is always 4th gear. It's just personal preference. You can use 3rd, you can use 5th if you want. Alignment is another pretty difficult tab if you don't really know what you're doing. This menu right here will make or break how your car drives overall. If your alignment tab looks like this, your car is not going to drive very well. Alright, so here's my base setting for alignment on pretty much every single car that I drive. Your front camber and your caster, all the way down here, they work together for when you're turning the wheels to give your tires the optimal contact patch with the ground. Same thing with your rear camber. If you have too much negative camber, your car, you're not going to have enough grip, you're not going to be able to go fast through the turns, you're not going to be able to propel your car forward as well. And the same goes for if you have too much positive camber in the rear. Same thing with the front. So I like to settle for a healthy medium. I normally go negative camber because I just like my cars to have more side bite, and then I use the toe to give it more forward grip. Steering angle, I use 60 because I'm on a wheel. If you're a controller driver, you might want to lower this down or maybe not even use it at all. Your anti-roll bars are what tie your suspension together on both sides of the vehicle. If you have your roll bars all the way down here like this, your car is going to have a lot of body roll. If you have your roll bars all the way stiff like this, your suspension won't be able to move independently from one side to another. So 28 and 26 are the base numbers for my anti-roll bars. I do this because it gives me a very good level of give from side to side, and it also ties them together nicely. If your front has too much understeer, you can always lower down the front anti-roll bars to get yourself a little more grip in the front tires. I wouldn't recommend lowering this by more than 2 points at a time, otherwise you can have trouble trying to find out what you messed up in your tune. If the back end of your car wants to step out too much and drift or oversteer, you can lower your rear anti-roll bars to have your suspension work more independently of each other, and that will give you more grip. But I find 28 and 26 is a really good starting number. Springs are a very crucial part of your tune, and they're probably the thing that varies the most between car to car. Every car is different because every car weighs a different amount, so therefore you have to compensate by adjusting your stiffness of your springs. I will post a sheet on screen now of the spring setups I think are best for each weight class of car. And the same thing that goes for anti-roll bars also applies to this tab here. If your car starts to understeer, you can soften the springs in the front, and if it starts to oversteer, you can soften them in the rear. Ride height. This is pretty straightforward for every car that I drive. So for most cars, I like to lower the back all the way, and then lower the front until the number is 0.2 inches higher than it is in the rear. This car works out pretty well because, as you can see, I have 4.4 inches in the front and 4.2 in the rear. Damping is one of those things where I normally just set it and forget it. Being damping is proportional to your spring rate, it normally doesn't change much in between cars. These are the base settings I use for pretty much all of my cars. One thing I can suggest, if your car feels really twitchy, you can stiffen the front rebound by up to about a half a point. The same thing goes for if it's really loose in the front, you can always lower it as well. I don't have any downforce on this car, but for most cars, for aero, I put the rear all the way towards cornering and the front all the way towards speed. It's just more of a personal preference and that's how I like it, and it's what I found gives my cars the most speed. Brakes are another thing that are pretty much personal preference. I actually leave mine right here at 50% and 100%. They're just what feels best to me with my wheel setup, and it varies person to person. These are pretty self-explanatory. You move the brake bias towards the front, it'll lock up the front more, and if you move them all the way towards the rears will lock up more. The braking force is pretty self-explanatory. 100% is the standard braking pressure, and at 200% your brakes are twice as sensitive as that, and at 50% they're half as sensitive. Onto the differential tab. The differential tab can be kinda hard to understand, but I'll walk you through it. The acceleration percent is the percent of speed the wheels are spinning of the other one. So if you have acceleration set to 100, both tires are spinning at the same speed under acceleration. If you have your acceleration at 50%, that means one tire will be spinning at half the speed as the other one. I always leave my acceleration at 100%, but I've seen other people go down as low as like 90. Deceleration is pretty much the same thing as acceleration, just when you're not on the gas. If you have it set to 100% like me, that means when you're not on the gas, both tires will still be spinning the exact same speed like a welded differential in real life. And if you have it set to 50%, when you're not on throttle, one tire will be spinning twice as fast as the other one. So just for the sake of my car feeling consistent when I'm on and off the gas, I just leave them both at 100-100, and I feel I get a little more speed out that way. When you have your camber set to 0, that means the tire is straight up and down. When you have more negative camber, you get a little bit more side grip. The only way I can really explain this is if you have a block on the ground that represents the tire, and you push it from one side, which is representing the sideward force of your car sliding across the pavement. Eventually, the block is going to want to tip over and put pressure on the opposite bottom end of the block. So by adding negative camber with that sideward force, it'll actually level out the tire in the middle of a drift. But do not aim for your tire in the middle of a drift to be at perfectly 0. You'd think that would make sense, but this is just a game, this isn't real life. Sadly, it doesn't work like that. It's just something you gotta work around. Do whatever feels best for you. Tow is also really important. If you have a bunch of tow in on your car, it kind of looks like your car has to pee, and it's not very great for trying to get the maximum grip out of your car. I normally leave my tow in the front at 0 because I found it doesn't really affect the handling of the car, and all it really does is slow you down. If you do insist on running tow in the front, I would never recommend running tow in, and only recommend at most 0.3 out in the front. Tow in the rear is really important because it angles the tires towards each other, and it actually gives you a lot more forward grip pushing your car to the inside of the track. Again, I would never recommend going tow out in the rear. It doesn't do good things, don't try it. So I'd recommend starting at 0.3 and decreasing it or increasing it as you see fit. Caster, this is also more of a personal preference kind of thing. I leave mine as 7 because I'm a wheel user and I enjoy having the car self-steer really well. The more caster you have, the better the car will self-steer. If you run a high rotation like me, you're going to benefit a lot from having a high front caster. If you run a really low rotation on the wheel or use a controller, I wouldn't recommend putting your caster very high, as it can actually make you twitch quite a bit. I'd like to iterate again that this is not the only way to tune a car in Forza. This is just what works for me and has worked for people that I'm close with. If you enjoy running really soft roll bars, or positive camber in the rear, or like really stiff springs or really soft springs, you're having your car way in the air. If it works for you, that's all that really matters. I'm just showing you guys what works for me, what helps me get a lot of speed out of my cars, and has helped me do pretty well in competitions in the past. Alright guys, I'm going to go through my tune setup one more time so you can pause it, and yeah, I'll see you guys on the track.